What dark family secret were you letting on once you were old enough? Story 1. My extremely wealthy uncle was going downhill quick with Alzheimer's. Before he was too far gone, he apparently made a deal with my aunt that when things got to the point that they would have to send him to a nursing home, she would kill him instead. He wrote all of this in a letter and gave it to the attorney of their estate. When the time came, I don't know why she chose to shoot him in the back of the head instead of something less violent, but she did. It was a pretty big trial with a fair bit of news coverage, and it really blew up when the lawyer testified and brought forward the letter. My aunt served like 2 years, I think, and was released on parole. Story 2. I found out when I was about 32 that apparently in 1973 my dad had a daughter he never knew existed that I found out because he texted that to me while I was working after finding out about it himself about 1 week earlier. She was in her late 40s by that point. I think that what's sort of tragic is all this time we thought I was my dad's only kid, and he always wanted a daughter, but never got one due to marriage's ending. He would have fucking loved this girl. His daughter was the result of a one-night stand with a girl he never talked to again, and according to his daughter, the mother had a mental breakdown not longer after giving birth and never really had custody of the daughter anyway. Dad never would have had any way to find out. The baby grew up with the mother's parents in another state, and the mother kind of went AWOL. Story 3. My parents took me to Disneyland for my 7th birthday. I recall landing, going to the park, having a great first day or two. Then my parents had to step out and take a bunch of phone calls. They sounded very stressed. They kept telling me nothing happened and everything was okay. Eventually we flew home. And surprise! Took an extra couple days to go to a big water park away from home that I fondly remembered this birthday and eventually forgot about any of the weirdness. Maybe 10 years later, my parents finally told me what happened. My uncle, my dad's brother, tried to kill himself on my 7th birthday. He shot himself in the stomach with a rifle. He was poor, addicted to drugs, no work, etc. He felt depressed my dad had the life he always wanted, so tried to kill himself. He ended up living. My parents took me to the water park so that we didn't have to come home to him leaving the hospital. By not telling me, my parents let me keep my birthday as my day, not the day Uncle tried to die. Knowing how a 7-year-old's brain works, I probably would have thought I had something to do with it. Story 4. I was pretty young when this happened, so the details won't be perfect, but the story is otherwise true that I grew up in a coastal town, and we had some neighbors whom I really liked. My parents were friends with them, their kids were roughly my age. Wonderful. We played together all the time. One day they very suddenly moved. I was a bit confused as there had been no clue that they were going. I remember some police cars and the moving vans weeks later, but that was it. My mother told me that the kid's grandmother had become very ill. The cops came to tell the family, and they left emergently to care for her and never came back. I was only about 5. Seemed legit. Many years later, as an adult and long since moved away from that area, my parents and I were reminiscing over our old home. I mentioned that I wondered what ever happened to them. That's when my mom told me the truth. The parents had gone out that night on a date and left the kids with a 14-year-old babysitter. When they returned home, they found the sitter murdered. Someone had broken into the home and essayed, then killed the sitter. My mom stated the cops think the sitter pretended to be the only one home to protect the kids. When the parents got home, they checked the kids were safe and set them back to sleep. The police obviously immediately came. Once the kids were hard asleep, the parents picked them up, put blankets over their heads, asked the cops to be silent as they walked them out, and took them out of the house. They gave the kids the same story my parents told me. Grandma was sick and they were going to live with her. Grandma dutifully played along with the ruse for several weeks until the parents could find a new home to live in. The kids were kept unaware of what had happened just mere feet from them, as they didn't want the kids to be forever terrified of it happening again. Not sure if the kids ever eventually figured out the truth of that one. Story 5. When I turned 21, my grandfather told me a story about his older brother that I had never heard. My great-uncle was a big boozer for most of his life. He passed at 92, and by then had switched from liquor to beer and wine. He also cut down to 1 pack of cigarettes a day instead of 2 after he had half a lung removed. Pap and my uncle grew up on a farm in the 30s and 40s. Mostly the family ran the farm by themselves, but from time to time, they would hire drifters on as farmhands. In 1950, my uncle and one of the farmhands were out drinking, and they were driving back to the farm in my uncle's convertible. My uncle was the one driving, and he misjudged a turn that had a steep bank on the right side. He ran the car up the embankment, which was steep enough to flip it. My uncle was thrown from the car, but the farmhand he was drinking with was only halfway out of the car when it landed. Pap said he was severed clean into two pieces, because the farmhand was just a drifter without any family to make much fuss, and because the Korean War had just started, my uncle was able to enlist and avoid any criminal charges. He was in Korea until the end of the war. That was the only time I've ever heard that story told, and although I would never be someone who has more than a few drinks before getting behind the wheel, it's something that definitely sticks in my mind. And it's a story I'll tell my own kids when they get their license. Story 6. Found this out after my grandfather died. Growing up, every older guy in the neighborhood would say how tough he was. I mean, he was the most intimidating man ID ever met. You would jump if he sneezed. I'm not even exaggerating. But ID never seen him actually fight. But everyone, women and men, would say he never lost a fight and usually never had to throw more than one punch to knock someone out. Simply put, he was a bad motherfucker. But growing up, he would always preach to me and my cousins to never fight if you could help it. Just walk away. If they're insulting, you just walk away. It's only words, sticks and stones and all that. Head drill it into our heads that you never fight unless you have to, and never under any circumstances do you throw the first punch. Ever. I was kind of confused. Every older person in our neighborhood would tell me how nobody fucked with Blackie because of how many people he knocked out, and he would always tell us not to fight. Turns out when he was in his 20s, he got into a fight with someone. Apparently, the guy kept insulting him and wouldn't leave him alone. Finally, he had enough and cracked the guy. Knocked him out with one punch. Problem is when he landed, he hit his head on a step. It was lights out for good. Killed him with one punch. I had never heard this story and confused about how he didn't get locked up. Turns out he did. Got like 15 to 20 years or something like that. Then WW2 happened. When I was a kid, ID always asked my mom how my grandfather entered the war. Was he drafted or volunteered? She'd say, oh, it was like the movie The Dirty Dozen, which I had never seen or had any interest in when I was young, so I had no idea what that meant. Turns out the Army made him a deal. Go to the front lines in Japan. If you live, well, expunge your record. If not, oh well. He went. Things made a lot more sense after that. Story 7. My grandma had an affair with a Catholic priest while she was married, and then left her high school sweetheart who she had 5 children with. Then she ended up living with said priest, and her kids had to lie and refer to him as an uncle when people asked them about their living situation that I always thought it was true love. I found and kept letters and notes they wrote each other when he was overseas with the military, and it seemed so genuine, and I'd always heard so many nice stories, and I suppose it could have been true love. I was raised to believe that my biological grandfather, my dad's real dad, was a monster. I had been under the impression he left my grandma and abandoned his 5 children. My one aunt died in a drunk driving accident, and he couldn't be bothered to show up. I never met him my entire childhood. I was literally encouraged to actively hate him. They said he remarried and basically started a new family and was controlled by his wife. The priest essentially raised my dad and aunts and uncles, and they have always revered him. He died before I was old enough to have any memories of him, but I'd always looked at him with a positive light. He'd taken my grandma and a couple of the kids to Hawaii, bought my grandma a Suburban, and the house was in his name. My grandma was even left his military benefits, still unclear on how this was finagled. He paid for the kids' colleges. He had an incredible life. He had pictures with Bob Hope and other celebrities, got to travel a ton of places, etc. One day, I was curious if he had any relatives alive and if they had ever known about this salacious relationship. Then I Googled him, and it changed my life forever. He, posthumously, was accused in a lawsuit with a large group of priests of wrongdoing over an extended period of time. You can guess the nature of the lawsuit. It was on several law websites, and I found the lawsuit papers. Surely enough, his name was mentioned. Unease began to ensue. I did more digging and eventually found a 16-page document. This document was specific to him and included a police report and internal Catholic Church investigations into his transgressions, among other things. Early into his priesthood, he was accused of harboring a runaway 14-year-old girl. He had explanations for everything. OFC reading the police report was absolutely devastating. BC, it seemed like the police did no due diligence and nothing came of the report. Then there were pages worth of internal Catholic Church investigations in which I learned he would have young, distastefully dressed girls hanging out in his rectory and was drinking and showing up to events and or not showing up at all. He once said he'd been called by the military and was away from the church, except he lied and had been drinking, gambling, and philandering with women. Members of the church and other priests wrote anonymous letters about his conduct and asked for his removal. There were bouts of rehab and probation, but he was moved to another church. Some of the same antics occurred. You get the picture. This man my family had told me to revere as a literal godsend was in fact nothing of the sort. Then I found a summary of all his transgression over the years that led to his retirement. This is when I found out when he took my grandma, dad, and his two siblings to get the Suburban, he physically assaulted my grandma and kicked my dad and his siblings. I cross-referenced all of this information with birth years, where they grew up and lived, and the fact my uncle still has a Suburban. I was by myself when I found all of this out, and I've asked my dad if he's ever looked him up, and he said yes. So he knows of the lawsuit, but I haven't asked if he dug as far as I did to find this 16-page document. I don't know how to approach this, or if it's even worth bringing up to him. I'm curious how much he knows, and if he remembers being assaulted. I'm also extremely disturbed if they knew of his past and chose to lie to me about this man. If they didn't, then my heart breaks for what they endured with years of lies, abuse, and the hurt they felt. It also makes me question my grandmother and her choices and everything she subjected her children to. My dad and aunt reconnected with my biological grandfather a few years ago. He eventually came to visit us from across the country. I was in my mid-20s meeting my biological grandfather. I am truly apathetic to him and forming a relationship with him. My mom's mom had 2 husbands, and those are my grandpas. My grandpas and grandmas have all passed now, so I've mourned losing all of my grandparents. I do not feel this man is my grandfather and have been at peace with this for a very long time. However, it's made me realize my grandma abandoned him. He was the one who came to the church with the suspicion she was having an affair with the priest. At that, my heart breaks for him. The priest also did my aunt's funeral, so while some piece of me feels I can't forgive him for not going to his own daughter's funeral, I also can't imagine having to face a priest who my wife ran off with. I'm so torn that my family pitted me against this man that is my biological grandfather when this priest was clearly a fraud and lacked human decency and morals. It is also clear that my grandma made extremely questionable decisions and, with other unrelated reasons, had tarnished my vision of her. Needless to say, one of my wild facts has changed significantly from my grandma fell in love with a priest. Truly so conflicting and heartbreaking. So that's it for now, folks. I hope you love the stories. Leave a thumbs up and subscribe, and hit the bell to get notified of future content. Peace.